Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I referenced this piece earlier in the show. This Molly Ball write-up in Time Magazine. The 2020, the secret 2020 election campaign. It's sort of a remarkable, if excruciating story. This is about the time where you're a month into a new administration, where people want to claim credit for the victory. How'd you do it? Who's responsible? Try to leverage their role into something advantageous for them. The shadow campaign. This is from the piece. The scenario of the shadow campaigners were desperate to stop was not a Trump victory. It was an election so calamitous that no result could be discerned at all. A failure of the central act of democratic self-governance that has been the hallmark of America since its founding. It's an interesting way to describe these shadow campaigners, which I'll get to in a second. If it's the central act of democratic governance, the hallmark of America, then why does anyone need to launch a secret campaign if its objective is to demonstrate that everything's on the up and up and you can have faith in the results? By the way, this shadow campaign and these shadow campaigners almost exclusively financed by the left, but Molly Ball writes, much of this activity took place on the left. It was separate from the Biden campaign, but it crossed ideological lines. Of course, this was run by the left, but it reveals more than it probably should. The shadow campaign was about running the mail-in ballot operation, anticipating ahead of time that there were plans to stop vote counting on election night, lining up bigwigs across the country from business and labor, again, well before the election, to go on TV and say there's nothing to see here. Anyone who thinks everything isn't on the up and up is out of their minds, is a conspiracy theorist, to marginalize anybody who asks any question, no matter how relevant. Now, again, the backdrop of this, remember, the mail-in balloting, 71% of the votes cast 71% of the votes cast were mail-in ballots. 58% of those went to Biden. 29% of the votes cast, the way election rules normally require voting in person on election day, 65% of those voted for Trump. Well, so what? The election came down to 40,000 votes in a few swing states, which makes those disparities suspect. 71% of votes cast mail-in ballot, 58% went to Biden. What's this other passage is important too. The story has people talking about bipartisan groups staffed with rabid Trump supporters, but no names are mentioned. This is sort of the other side of the coin of the unnamed sources. This was bipartisan effort. There were rabid Trump supporters and so on and so forth. And the only Trump supporter, even a marginal Trump supporter they come up with, is former Tennessee congressman who previously had said Trump should never be elected president of the United States. Rabid, though. For more on all of this, the secret campaign to legitimize everything that transpired ahead of time and, of course, after the fact, and correspondingly delegitimize everyone to this day who has any questions about any election anomaly. We're pleased to be joined by Mark Hemingway, who's a reporter for RealClearInvestigations.com. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
I want to get to your piece about how the first impeachment trial set up Biden's presidential election victory, because that's important as well. It's a good piece. But your comment on this secret campaign to legitimize how the elections were administered and what the results were well in advance, and this sort of really taking the tone of a celebratory piece. Our institutions held, and our institutional vanguards held those institutions for us, saved the republic from Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an amazing piece. I mean, in the sense that, I'm not particularly sure what's described in the article is even necessarily illegal or otherwise sinister. It looks like a lot of coordination, across a lot of groups to get a result in the election. But having said that, the way that it is described in the article is a secret cabal to change election rules and control the flow of information. It's just astounding, right? that's the kind of thing. If I had said that out loud on Twitter a couple of months ago, I would have gotten me banned. I mean, and I just don't understand at a time when these people who are, trying to, tell us that, QAnon is like the world's biggest threat, and these, awful domestic terrorists that have to be dealt with. What do QAnon believe? I mean, these are people that believe that there's this massive conspiracy to control elections, and here time is, going out there spiking the football and saying, yeah, we won with this massive conspiracy to, predetermine an electoral outcome. I just don't. Everything about the piece is basically concerning, and I cannot believe it made it through layers of editing in that form.
It is remarkable. I mean, it's the other thing though too is the point here is to continue to deplatform, to borrow the word of the culture, any questions that persist about what happened in 2020, even when we get past impeachment 2.0 and all this stuff, and there is fault on obviously a lot of fault on the Trump side, the legal team, the PR effort. I mean, so many people running around and frankly not coordinating their resources, maybe the way the secret cabal did, in a way that's productive to get past these sort of categories of inquiry for which nobody ever advances the flag towards an answer. You just keep repeating the same. Here were how many people in various batches of votes were problematic in various states. We know this, and we don't have answers to that, and we don't have answers to the changing of the rules, and we don't have answers. There's no advancing this narrative by Trump supporters, and the ongoing effort by the cabal that's described by Molly Ball and others is to just continue to rinse and repeat that everything was fine, everything was on the up and up. Anybody who says the election was stolen is a liar, and anybody who asks a question about electoral anomalies is a conspiracy kook.
Yeah, your point about the piece being very much sort of designed to delegitimize questions being asked is a good one, and it's relative to my piece too. But that's exactly what's going on here. Like, they want to post-election establish one exclusive narrative that is the quote-unquote truth, and anybody that has any questions about elections or mail-in ballots or all these other things that exist. We know our democracy is not perfect. We know mail-in ballots have lots of problems. There's all kinds of things that we need to address, but they want to establish one definitive narrative of the truth that I think gives the left a sort of systemic advantage and forbid anyone from questioning those factors that give them a systemic advantage. And it is deeply disconcerting effort, and to see it being led by the ostensible media is just appalling. I mean, we should all be very concerned about that.
In your piece, now let's turn to your piece about impeachment 1.0 and how the groundwork the Democrats used the impeachment of President Trump over his call with Ukrainian President Zelensky to lay the groundwork for the 2020 election. It wasn't even perhaps so much about an actual effort to remove him from office. It was about 2020.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is important now to set the narrative, before people forget about what happened specifically. And I'm not talking about some secret cabal of things. I'm talking about what happened out in the open with the impeachment proceedings a little over a year ago. And for people to not forget what exactly happened there. In this case, we had a really unprecedented impeachment proceeding on all kinds of ways. I mean, first of all, how many of your listeners even remember the specifics of what it was about? Second of all, instead of doing it out in the open and doing it through the normal congressional procedures, they ran it through the Intel Committee in the House instead of the Judiciary Committee, and they had all the witnesses basically testify in secret. And part of the reason why they did that was because they knew that Joe Biden's corruption was going to be an issue in the impeachment trial, and they wanted to make sure that question got delegitimized and it wasn't this thing that roiled the entire election. And sure enough, later on, when allegations of Biden corruption came up, which were very pertinent to the impeachment proceeding, the media declared right off right out of the gate that any questions were, quote unquote, Russian disinformation. Of course, just in the last month or two, we've learned that, oh, by the way, the Justice Department has had a corruption investigation open on Hunter Biden for over 2 years. And then the New York Post report that was literally censored by social media in October turns out to be almost certainly true. And Democrats' entire impeachment proceeding was designed to make it so that we did not in any way publicly discuss questions about Biden impeachment, Biden corruption, and if we did later do it, it would be considered taboo or verboten.
Well, the mainstream media has been campaigning against President Trump, or they were for the last 4 years. So was it any surprise to you that 45% of Biden voters said they were unaware of Hunter's financial scandals before the election?
No, it wasn't. And what's crazy about that is you saw reporters like Sam Stein at Politico. He was at Huffington Post. No, he was at the Daily Beast, and now he's the White House reporter for covering the Biden administration at Politico, saying in November after the election that the difference in the election compared to the Hillary Clinton laptop scandal in 2016 was that it didn't spill over into the mainstream press. The Hunter Biden laptop story was talked about online, but the mainstream press didn't cover it. And Sam Stein was saying that was the difference in the election. Like, yay, we in the press did it. We were responsible, for Biden's victory. And the crazy thing is they might have been with, only 40,000 votes being, the difference in 3 states. So it's astonishing to see what's supposed to be a free and fair media out there, like spiking the football about, we're the people that decide the election for you.
And well, with respect to that first impeachment, though, some say, well, wait a second, that happened in the fall of 2019 before Joe Biden was the putative nominee. So how could the Democrats have known they were setting this up for Joe Biden in 20?
Well, he was already heavily favored to be the candidate for Democrats at the time impeachment got rolling. But more than that, it was simply that I'm not sure when they started impeachment, they quite realized what they were doing because it immediately started to blow up in their faces. First, there was the issue of how the impeachment proceeding got started, because remember, it was the CIA whistleblower that came forward, except we had these issues here where the whistleblower laws didn't actually apply to the president, according to the Justice Department. And on top of that, the whistleblower was revealed, one, had a pre-existing working relationship of some kind with Joe Biden himself. And then two, it turns out that long before the whistleblower complaint had, even been formalized, he was working with Adam Schiff's staff, who, by the way, Schiff is not coincidentally the guy leading impeachment for the Democrats. So there were all these issues right away that Democrats didn't anticipate, I think, and then they immediately had to sweep under the rug while they were still pursuing impeaching the president. So they had to run an impeachment proceeding about whether or not it was valid for Trump to ask for a corruption investigation into the Bidens from a foreign government without ever addressing any questions about whether or not Biden's corruption, inquiries into Biden's corruption was legitimate. So it's kind of amazing. I mean, in a lot of ways, because they had, full cooperation from the media, they got away with that. Several witnesses in the trial admitted that the Hunter Biden corruption stuff looked bad. Joe Manchin, a Democratic senator from West Virginia, when we got to the Senate impeachment trial, publicly said that Hunter Biden should be a witness in the impeachment trial because his corruption was a valid part of the impeachment. Yet Democrats never had to make that an issue in the impeachment trial, and Trump got impeached.
Which is less likely to happen, do you think? Something found against Hunter Biden or nothing found by Durham?
I mean, I don't know if it's an either or, but yeah, I mean, that's your question. It gets to the fundamental frustration of a lot of Trump voters. It just seems like no matter how corrupt you are from a certain side, if it's politically damaging to Democrats, somehow nothing ever comes of it. I mean, the FBI attorney who literally forged an entire email to get a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign just got probation. I mean, if that's not a crime, lying to a judge to spy on a private citizen, if that doesn't get you jail time, I mean, what will? I mean, what do you have to do if you are trying to help Democrats win an election that's illegal to put you in jail? It's just disgusting.
I wanted to ask you this too. This is off topic, so this is more about culture and how quote unquote journalists are degrading it. Taylor Lorenz, she is a tech and culture reporter for the New York Times. She falsely and very publicly accused Silicon Valley entrepreneur Mark Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape, of having used a slur word for a person with disabilities during a discussion about the Reddit GameStop uprising. It turns out Andreessen never used that word. She, rather than apologize, rather than the New York Times reporter Taylor Lorenz apologized, she just said it was a male voice that sounded like his. It's a small thing, probably not a small thing to Mark Andreessen. These are sorts of things, accusations that turn out not to be small things in the real world these days. Just ask Justin Thomas, but calling himself a name, and she just walks away from it as a male voice, close enough.
I don't know what to say. I mean, like, there are the number of astonishing journalistic errors that are either willful or come from a place of extreme disregard for the truth anymore, are just absolutely off the charts. And then people wonder why you have things like QAnon, because people don't know what to believe anymore. I mean, they know they can't believe in the New York Times, and they have darn good reasons for it. Like, that's just, that seems like the 5,000th thing in the last year that has emanated from that particular paper, where, whether it was, the 1619 Project or, New York Times journalists going on the air and saying that, oh, we shouldn't be concerned about the rioters because, destroying property isn't violence. I mean, we could just go on, and we want to go into the Twitter accounts of New York Times reporters. We could just go on and on. We just had a New York Times reporter resign because he allegedly used a racial slur talking to a teenager in the context of explaining why racial slurs are bad.
Ridiculous.
You're right. What is there left to say? I mean, how do you, how can you describe this sort of inanity other than to call it what it is? I don't know either. I don't know. He is Mark Hemingway. He's a reporter for RealClearInvestigations.com. Do check out his piece, which I'll tweet out, Hiding Biden, How Democrats Crafted the First Impeachment, Helping Defeat Trump in 2020 with Media Help. Mark, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.